group. And thank you, Dina, for starting the recording. This meeting is a bit different than our other meetings that are bi-monthly. Since we do a lot of business at this meeting, we'll elect board members, adopt the budget, we'll have other business items, and then we'll have a summary of activities. We'll have a very short presentation by Alex here on non-point source phosphorus feasibility study. It's not long enough to warrant a credit from the EPA for wastewater operators. So if you're attending as an operator, just be aware of that. It's been another year of online meetings, and we've all persisted through a lot of Zoom fatigue. So I really appreciate that everyone is here and at our other meetings. We often have over 50 members attending our meetings, which is great. That's the upside of Zoom. So hopefully we will have the opportunity to meet in person. We'll look for opportunities this coming year. And we have a number of field trips that we could do too, as we have projects going on. So hopefully we'll be able to get to see each other once the weather warms in person. So Stephen, I want to turn it over to you at this point.
Thanks.
We want to do the approval of the minutes.
If we're ready for that, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Alex's presentation is going to fall in the middle of the project updates.
Okay, so we'll move into the bulleted items. First one is approval of the minutes from December 8th, 2021. And as we do, if someone wants to make that motion by raising your hand, I see Larry Cox making the motion, second by Jennifer Hammer. And then we'll have a poll for the vote to approve.
Okay, the motion has passed with one abstention.
Great, thank you. The next item is a bylaws change. The executive board has talked about the desire to add 2 additional members to the board. Currently, and this is attached as number 2 to the agenda, there are 4 standing committees. We would make that 5 by adding the projects committee, which is a very active committee and certainly warrants being a standing committee. And the members at large going from 4 to 5. And at least now 3 of them instead of 2 of them must represent an agency member. So in total, we're adding 2 members to the board through this bylaws change. As we are busy with many activities, we want to make sure that we have enough voices, enough people to help out. We also are looking for people to grow into officer leadership positions. So with this bylaw change, Amy Underwood would move from an at-large member to a committee chairperson. And then we would have 2 vacant at-large positions on the board. So if there are any questions, you can type that into the chat. If not, we'll entertain a motion. Let's watch the chat for a second. Not seeing any questions. So I have a motion here by Greg Ulrich and a second by Jennifer Hammer. And we can have a vote on that.
Sorry. The motion has passed unanimously.
Great.
Dave, there were a couple of other bylaw items that were changed? It was in the packet, but you spoke to the principal one.
Yes.
But
everything is in your attachment too. The other one was that the complete list of officer and member at large nominations would be given 14 days prior to the annual meeting, where it says currently February 1st. And then there was a change about payments for program work. I don't know if you had any other comment about on the bylaws and that, Stephen?
No, I just wanted to reflect that there were, were we voting for all of these as a slate or only that individual item? Item.
Yeah, so that this was for a vote for the complete bylaws change as presented in attachment 2, and that's as stated in the agenda. All right, next item is election of officers and members at large. These are one-year terms, and everyone is continuing in their current positions. I want to thank everyone, listing them down the line. Myself continuing as president from the Village of Lombard. We have Sue Barrett as vice president from the Wheaton Sanitary District. Rick Federighi of the Village of Addison as our secretary treasurer. At-large members, Mary Beth Falsey of DuPage County, Adam Gronsky of MWRD, Steve Zahner of Robinson Engineering. And then we have the 2 vacant positions that were just created by the bylaws change. So as we do with our bylaws, we have a nominated slate. That's the slate as presented. And if there's a motion to approve, there is by second, Dennis Stryker and Rich Salerno, first and second.
And the motion has passed unanimously.
All right, thank you, everyone. And then we get on to the appointment of the committee chairpersons, and also continuing in their current roles. Jennifer Hammer of TCF on the monitoring committee. Larry Cox of the Downers Grove Sanitary District for the East Branch Committee. Eric Knighty of the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County for the West Branch Committee. Dennis Stryker of the Sierra Club, River Prairie Group for the Salt Creek Committee, and Amy Underwood of the Downers Grove Sanitary District for the Projects Committee. So I want to thank everyone for continuing. We really depend on these committees. I know we did get some interest when I had asked for people to volunteer back when I sent the certificates out. Thank you. If you would like to serve on one of those committees, certainly contact myself or Stephen. Some of the committees are much more active than others. A lot of the business is just done by email, but we do want to have anyone who's interested able to serve on a committee. All right, next is adoption of the budget. This is something that Stephen will handle.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So what I'm going to do, Dave, is I'm going to go through the budget, and then we'll go to these items individually for voting on them. Just checking, did my screen share change, or do you still see the? It
changed. We have the budget.
Good. I sometimes it just takes the individual screen, but I had these lined up, so I was hoping it would work that way. Okay. So what people will find in their packets is they will find the 22 to 23 annual budget, and then they will find the an additional 4 years of planning beyond that to show how our revenue and debits line out for 4 years in the future. I'm going to move over this sheet, which is number 8 of 22 in your packet, which shows this is like the master sheet summary. For the budget, we're going to look at a couple of the individual items that make this up, and then we're going to move back to this sheet to wrap up. So our revenues for the general fund, of course, come mainly from our agency member dues. And you can see here the column that is bolded in each of these sheets represents the planning year, that's 22 to 23. So it starts at the 1st of March, and then it'll run through to the 28th of February in 2023. We are scheduling to bring in $512,000 and $390 this year. And you can see the associate member and individual dues beneath that for a grand total of $518,000 and $80,000 rather. This is matches what we had planned in previous years and represents a 3% inflation that we have planned into the budget. Then that is followed by the detail of this. In your agenda packet, there is a breakout there according to how we break those out according to watershed, discharge flow from wastewater treatment facility, and administrative fee that all aggregate up to this total, and the total is given here in the budget. That is then followed by associate member dues from both. We obviously have once again inflated by 3%. We have our nonprofit and governmental groups, and then we have our corporate members. A new item in the budget this year is grants revenue. Typically in the past, we have not been, for a number of years, we've not been carrying any grant revenue. We are running a watershed plan in the Upper Salt Creek. If you remember, in previous years, we had worked with CMAP in DuPage County to do a 319 watershed plan for the Lower Salt Creek. This one would be for the upper portion, mainly in Cook County. And we have $120,000 to do that plan. You can see here the revenue, this represents revenue from the plan, which is majority of that coming in this year, and then some in 23 and 24. This is balanced out in our other projects where you'll see the outflow of cash as what the work group will be doing. We'll be paying the contractors to help develop that plan, and then we'll be recouping that money. So this represents the reimbursement here. We'll see the outgoing funds, which will balance to this in a few sheets. We are carrying, as we've got some big projects on the launch pads, we are carrying quite a lot of money at the moment, which in principle should generate a considerable amount of interest. Obviously, interest rates are very low there. They are starting to climb now. So, that took a plunge 2 years ago, is creeping up again, but obviously has somewhat lagged behind. But as you can see, here in 21 to 22, the current fiscal year, we did generate nearly $10,000. Now we are previewing, conservatively, but previewing $5,520 in the upcoming fiscal year. And once again, out at the side here, then you can see what we're projecting into the future. Those are obviously, based on certain assumptions, and we correct them as we move into each fiscal year. Okay, moving into expenses. This is the administrative element that covers staff salaries, the cost of running the organization, and insurance, tax filings, and such. The principal item here is staff salary. This has been inflated over past years. There is a salary adjustment, which has been given by the board to staff, and also includes a multiplier from the Conservation Foundation. We also have 401k match in here and fixed office expenses that covers offices, telephones, and such. Some of these items have decreased since past years. If we go down the column, a lot of this covers sort of paperwork etc. But some items worth pointing out on is that, sorry, here we have insurance, which has declined in last year. We were budgeting over $9,000 and that is reduced to $2,000. The reason we had budgeted for that last year was we were previewing if we needed to take on extra insurance. We've decided that that is not the case. So insurance has gone back down to what we had been paying in past years. That's all I really need to call out there. But total for administrative budget is $377 or sorry, $300,000 and $77. In the general fund, our other large expenditure item is the monitoring expenses. As you know, we operate monitoring on a 4-year cycle, which is 3 years of monitoring, one for each of the basins. And then we have an off year, and then we start the monitoring again. 2022 to 23 is going to be an off year. So if you look along the totals at the bottom, you'll see it is one of the last costly years. Now, that item has not gone to zero. It's $170 plus $1,000. This reflects the fact that we are still paying invoices from bioassessments in from 2020 and 2021, and those go over there, but we're not incurring any new bioassessment costs in 22 to 23. We're not purchasing any, no additional equipment is due to be purchased this year, but we do have the upkeep costs. These items here to here represent payments to MBI for previous bioassessments as we're moving towards the final report. We have previewed, well, rather we have dropped our MS4 support for this year. We do that in conjunction with the bioassessments. This is additional sampling we do, help support our MPDS permit holder members, especially DuPage County, who produce a overall report for the county. And this was done to collect additional parameters that we then help populate that report with. These were parameters not that IEPA want to collect it, but were not typically collected under our bioassessment, such as fecal coliform. And then we have some data management costs on our staff intern. In total, for 22 to 23, we are previewing $170,250. Chloride reduction expenses. This sheet is a little complex because there's money flowing out and back into the sheet. But basically it covers that we're going to maintain doing our workshops where we worked with Lake County and Will County principally last year to hold a series of virtual workshops. That's what we are planning again this year, but there will be some in-person workshops. We did do a calibration workshop this year, previewing something like that for upcoming. So these central costs here cover that. We are also continuing to work on with the tollway. We're looking at getting grants for Village of Itasca and the Village of Elmhurst for their winter de-icing equipment. And the other item is we have our future initiatives here at 10,000. This is, we're looking at a more intensive review of chlorides that are captured by street sweeping. We have done some limited sampling in the past, enough to show that it does look like there is a significant amount of chlorides captured by street sweeping, specifically during that spring period, which is very important to the aquatic life that is our principal objective. Total, we're previewing an expenditure of $34,220. IPS, this is our identification and prioritization model. We had on that contract with MBI, we still have $2,200 outstanding. This, we're just holding on to this until the final report is produced. We have numerous draft reports. Of that, 2/3 of that would be reimbursed to us by our partners. That's Will County and Lake County, and our total cost to us previewed then will be $730. We also have the Power BI workshop. This was planned to be held earlier on this year. It was not held as the trainer became, fortunately, fell ill. But we are planning that will be held later on in the year. We also have this $15,000 item for a level of rigor analysis on the IPS model and its outputs, which would, as we're looking to move it into helping us make more and more regulatory decisions. Total expenditure on this item we're previewing for 22 to 23 is $45,730. So the item here that's previewed in 22 to 23 is this $64,920 item, which would bring the total expenditure for the project up to the $120,000 for grants that we had seen in the previous sheet. So this is simply the expenditure side of that revenue sheet that we looked at earlier. All right, on to the really fun stuff here. So this is the project implementation table for the projects that we pursue under our special conditions for our wastewater treatment plant members. Across the top here, we have the inflow of funds from the special conditions payments that members make into this fund. These are set out in detail on the final sheet of this study. So this sheet simply pulls these figures in. A couple of things to note is for the first year, we are including payments in from 23-24 through to 25-26. These represent the extension permit that we'll be talking a little bit about, but these are our members who have opted to extend their special conditions out and so elongate the amount of time that they have for planning to remove phosphorus. So typically this is pushing it out to the region of 2028 to 2031. So these revenues are coming in. I've netted out DuPage County at the moment as we don't have a signed MOU with them, but they have a permit set up for this. So the principle would be that it's pending and will be coming in, but I have not included them in the budget for at this time. Also included here are payments from the Lower DuPage Watershed Coalition. They make payments to the DRCW to help develop the nutrient implementation plan, which is also in their permits. The straight project funds that go into projects are being handled by them directly, but once again, specify under the sort of allocated by the IPS tool outputs. So in this sheet here, once again, the specific payments are in the bold 22 to 23 budget column. I'm not going to go through all of these items, but we are hoping to, we're currently working on a memorandum of understanding with DuPage County Stormwater for the placement of the fish ramp at Faywell Dam. That project is previewed to be put in place this year. We are also previewing that we could start work at the Fullersburg Woods project this year. And so once again, we see a larger sum of money in there in terms of those are implementation funds. Total funding set aside for that project is a little less than $6 million. This includes the contracts with AECOM that we'd had, and then currently with Hay & Associates, and then the construction funds. And that construction will be run in conjunction with the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. We have Alex will be reporting on our non-point source study, which was an item that we had to research under the NIP, and we have filed that report. But there may be some additional items that we want to do to make sure that we've quantified what phosphorus is captured by our street sweeping and leaf litter pickup programs. Also previewed here is the amount for working with Carroll Stream for the Klein Creek project, which is a restoration habitat restoration project downstream of the outfall from their treatment facility as part of a sort of northern Klein Creek restoration. And then we have the balance of our payment for work with the Interfluve in development of the enhancement plan for Southern East Branch. And then for that project, as we move out into 23 through to 25, we've previewed the payments for the actual implementation of that project. The following, the next items from Qual 2K down to nutrient implementation plan are items that then are fall under our NIP, and we are planning to really get most of the work for that project, that particular item, developed this year, with the idea that we'd be moving into negotiation of what the NIP permits would look like into the future for our wastewater treatment plant members. We'd be looking to try to get that negotiated this year, by wrapping up essentially the NIP and then getting it documented and produced as an official document the following year. In total, we are budgeting that we could spend up to a little over $5 million this year. Obviously that Faywell going, and then of course also the Fullersburg Woods project moving into construction. Obviously, if Fullersburg doesn't move into construction this year, it would be going to construction next year, and those funds would simply be placed into the following year. So I'm going to return to this revenue sheet at the beginning, which is the summary sheet. It's important to review this just so it checks how our revenues and expenditures match up. These are given in these ending fund balance figures here. As you can see here, this is the ending fund balance for our general fund. You can see it's at that 457 figure, and you can see it going into the future here. The figure I'd like you to look at is this 489. That shows that, we're maintaining, obviously would need to be inflation adjusted, but we are maintaining a healthy balance in that general fund out to 26 to 27. And that's important because while we don't do monitoring this year, that is that balance after 3 years of monitoring. And it's the monitoring that tends to draw that fund down. In our special conditions fund here, which is this part of the budget, ending fund balance is 4.598 million. Once again, that then has to cover our future constructions at East Branch, etc. And then we have revenues coming in on that project, but we are planning, even with the additional 3 years, that this project, this would then be pulled down to $0 in 26 to 27. Yeah. What I neglected to mention on the projects, special conditions project sheet, is that we the additional $3 million that were coming in from the permit extension, essentially $1 million of that got assigned to each branch. So $1 million went into the Fullersburg project, another $1 million went into the East Branch project, and then there was $1 million left floating for West Branch projects that have not yet been identified. The IPS tool certainly has a number of projects to attach it to, but we didn't take the step of doing that at this time. It is there as a line holding item, and that was the final. In fact, it's worth going to look at. That is this item here, West Branch Restoration Project through here. So that's these two items here. Worth mentioning. We also have. Also neglected to mention was this contingency fund, which is there to help with any of the individual projects that perhaps end up being more expensive than we had originally planned. Okay. So Dina, did we have any questions about any of the material I covered?
Not so far. If anyone
Okay.
has any questions, you can put it in the chat or the Q&A.
And of course, as with any of these items, if it's available on the website. If this is voted in today, it is currently as draft on the website. It will get filed as accepted up on the website for the current year, and the other this particular document with the 4 additional years will be there for planning purposes. Ever any questions on any of course, please feel free to call me. I think that's everything I need to cover there. So we can go back to the agenda. And the first thing is that we vote to approve the 22 to 23 annual dues schedule for agency members, which is in your packet as attachment 3.
Thank you, Stephen. I would add that, of course, the budget was reviewed.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Much in detail by the board. The board did vote to recommend it to the membership. So it's a lot to digest. We spent hours doing so. So I want to give you that assurance too, that it is, it's been combed over and this is recommended by the board.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dave. Sorry. And I'd also like to just again thank board member Larry Cox, who's always very helpful on this item.
So we've broken this up into 3 votes. The first one, as you said, is a motion to approve the due schedule. And I see a motion by Dennis Stryker and a second by Rich Salerno. So we can put that up for a vote, please.
The motion has passed with 1 abstention.
Great. Thank you. And then the second of the 3 is a motion to approve the 2022 to 2023 budget.
Yeah, and just once again to point out, this does not mean the years beyond 22 to 23 are shown in that document for planning. It does not mean that we're accepting those, but this is a step that the board takes to check that we remain financially viable into the future. The vote that we're taking today is simply for the expenditures that are planned in for budget year 22 to 23.
Right. Okay, I see a motion by Rich Salerno and a second by Greg Ulrich.
And the motion has also passed with 1 abstention.
All right, and lastly, as Stephen just said, this is a motion to post the 5-year financial plan for informational and planning purposes only. So we're not approving those numbers, but we are projecting them. And a motion by Rich Salerno and a second by Jennifer Hammer.
And that motion has passed unanimously.
Great. Thank you. Next bulleted item in the agenda is the financial report for December 1st through January 31st. These are posted for information. We don't need a vote on these. These are all reviewed principally by the committee chair in charge of the activity, and then recommended for the board to vote on. So these are all reviewed individually. Any other thing to comment on these, Stephen or Dina?
Nope, all operating as within prior budgets.
Okay, and thank you to Nancy Sonata who drives around between my office and Rick's office to get checks signed. We're still having a lot of running around, even though we're largely virtual. Other business.
Yeah, just two items here, and a third one that isn't in the isn't listed here, but we have a Upper Salt Creek stakeholders meeting scheduled for March 8th, 2022. Dina and Alex, do we have any of the members currently on who are partaking in that, or are we inviting other folks to perhaps sit in on it if they're interested?
Yeah, anyone who's interested should be on a mailing list and gotten those invitations. All the municipalities, the park districts that are associated with that, with the Upper Salt Creek watershed, which is Bussey Lake and North. And if you have not been getting those emails, you can just email me and I can get you onto that distribution list. And everything is posted on the website, which I believe is like uppersaltcreek.com. I can confirm that.
Yeah, and I know these watershed plans can all get confusing. This watershed plan, we refer to it as the 319 watershed plan. And so it's looking mainly at non-point source items, but it does make when an area is covered by such a plan, it does make projects eligible for 319 funding. So this was a service to members, and it was requested by MWRD that we work on this. And so we're moving forward doing it. Once in place, the whole of the Salt Creek watershed will be covered by a 319 plan. Also know DuPage County Division of Stormwater has been very active in getting these plans in place in the Upper DuPage watershed. On stormwater, as we know, a new MS4 permit is in the offing. The draft ILR 40 can be viewed at the link that we have there. Also recently released was the draft integrated report from Illinois EPA. Staff have not had the time to sit down and go through it, but I was at my office last night and there was a couple of calls on my phone from other entities outside of the DRSCW asking if they could chat to us about some of the stuff in there. Staff will be getting around to that in the next, well, today, tomorrow, to look through it. Obviously an important document for us to keep tabs on. And thanks to IEPA for all their work on pulling all that together. Oh yeah, and I guess on that integrated report, if I know a number of members also really pay attention to that, if anything is in there that jumps out at you and you want to chat, just give either Dina or myself a call. So DRSCW calendar, we did have a couple of chloride presentations. You can see, just one to call out was this sensible salting. We were requested to pull this together for the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus Environmental Committee, and myself and Jason Pauling, Carol Stream spoke. We also had invited Wilf Nixon from the Professional Snowfighters Association, and another staff person from the DRSCW, or sorry, from the Conservation Foundation was on there, Hannah, who is overseeing the time-limited water quality standard work group in Cook County. And it seemed like a good opportunity to approach the folks out there who are covered by that from a different direction. I know she's already got a lot of, it was pricked up ears, obviously, to hear that there was, that there was in the offing. So hopefully that has brought a few more folks to the table. End of April, myself and board member Adam Gronsky are going to be on a moderating and on a panel at about NARPs, which we'll be talking about in our review of programs now. So other items here is just, once again, our ongoing schedule. We're still programming them via Zoom. Board will keep us advised on if we can move back to in person or how that's going to work, and perhaps we'll want to do some sort of survey with members to see what they want. Though I have to admit, I do miss the in-person meetings. So Dave, I think that's everything on the agenda before we move into the project briefs and roundup.
All right, thanks, Stephen. I don't see any questions in the chat. Again, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to talk to us that way. So we can move into the activities update.
Yeah, so what we're going to do here is, this is not meant to be a comprehensive review of all of these projects, bar the leaf litter project, which we finalized the report in December. But what we're going to just do quickly is talk about what we take that from that budget and the projects that we're currently working on. So this is our both our physical implementation projects and the water quality planning type projects. So Dina, next slide.
Hold on one second. I couldn't
That's
unmute
okay.
myself, so I needed to get out of it
Yeah.
and then go back. Sorry, because of the way that my screens are set up. Sorry.
Yeah, you don't need to apologize. It's like sometimes I'm afraid to touch the buttons.
Okay, can you see the screen now?
Can do.
Okay, there we go.
So first item I'd just like to address is the permit update. So last year we negotiated with IEPA and our environmental partners an extension of the special conditions. So the special conditions was a method of trading out our watershed priorities, which were essentially intensive habitat, aquatic habitat improvement and dam removals, and offsetting. We could not find a good explanation for why phosphorus was impinging on aquatic life. So we traded the cost of removing phosphorus, or some portion of those costs, for improvement of our watersheds via our own plan, and this was accepted by the various levels of regulatory agencies and our environmental partners. So as we've moved into that, individual members were able to review the costs of staying in the special conditions vis-a-vis moving to the 1 milligram per liter monthly average. And some members have opted to stay on the original conditions, which was essentially a 10-year period when they we're not going to be removing phosphorus, and then moving into a planning period for upgrading their treatment plants, and then hitting the 1. And those are what we're calling the original permit members here. And then we had a second set of members which opted to increase the duration of the special conditions. That is, that they stay funding the implementation of our watershed plan, and will then push out the removal of phosphorus by a further 3 years. And they're set out there. Once again, note that DuPage County Public Works is pending, but the rest of the folks listed there have all signed an MOU to do that. And that is the funds that we saw in the budget that have been added in the budget this year, starting next year and running out an additional 3 years. It puts an additional about $3.2 million into the special conditions funding for improvement of local waterways. The new permit for the extension folks gives them a date to hit the 1 milligram per liter monthly average. As you can see there, I put out there, they'd be 28 to 29, approximately, depends on when the individual permit was due. And what it does, it stays on the original schedule that was signed back in 2015. It doesn't move with the permits, essentially running a year behind, but that has not affected the date that phosphorus would be removed at. However, it does include this additional language, which we had agreed on with IEPA, which was that they will remove phosphorus by date X, or in accordance with the implementation schedule included in the nutrient implementation plan, unless the agency approves and reissues or modifies the permit to include an alternative phosphorus reduction program or limit pursuant to paragraphs F3, F8, which are then shown in the permit. And that's important because the plan here is that based on our own analysis, we would be moving into a nutrient implementation plan schedule, and Dina will be talking in some detail about what that's going to look like. That we'll be having a more intensive presentation on it at our April meeting. Oh, Dina, sorry, next one. I keep going to advance here. Okay, so a quick update on the physical projects. Our under the special conditions, our first physical project was Oak Meadows, which we implemented with DuPage County Forest Preserve, completed back in 2016 with the objective of raising macroinvertebrate population scores within the river system. Dina, next slide. So this is the graphical output of the intensive monitoring post-project. The project is basically that green bar that runs down the graph vertically. Thanks, Dina. I was realized once again, you probably saw I was trying to do that. I was like, oh, that's right, it's not on my computer. And what you can see there is that we successfully moved out of the sample sites there. There's 4 of them. Dina, could you just show that sample site that's covered with the triangle there, 2019? It's overlaying the 2021, the 20 in that particular area. Yeah, just there. So there's 4 sample sites there, and you can see that 3 of the 4 were moved up to the upper band of that gray, which represents the area where we are in compliance with the aquatic life score for macroinvertebrates. So obviously that's really encouraging. It does show that we were able to push the IBI scores from the low 20s, which were our pre-project monitoring showed. Those are the open icons that you can see there for 2013, and then post-project, and then 2014, and then post-project, we were able to push them up into largely meeting compliance. So that suggests that the system, our IPS model, is accurate in detecting what the stressors to aquatic life are, and that those stressors do respond to managerial outcomes. Okay, Dina, next slide. So the next project then is the Spring Brook project, once again with DuPage County Forest Preserve. This project, actually, funding for it was taken over by the Illinois Tollway. Thanks very much to them for that. That meant that we were able to take the $1 million that we had assigned to the project and place it on other projects, which we'd already covered earlier in the budget. This is an aerial view of the early project following vegetation fill-in. I think this was taken from early 2021. Okay, Dina, next slide. So we do pre-project again and post-project monitoring. 2018 here represents the intensive pre-project monitoring. So this is monitoring we do on top of our bioassessment. And then the sort of pinkish icons represent the post-project monitoring. As you can see here, QHEIs did in fact move pretty substantially. If the you can see once again the restored area is called out there. We always sample or try to sample some sites outside the restored area just as a kind of control, because especially with macroinvertebrates, there is always some variation. They bounce around a little bit just due to what weather will essentially drive a certain amount of them. That increases the amount of chlorides, ammonia, or the amount of flow, or lessens the flow, and all those things have impact. So it's a bit of a control. But you can see here that QHEI certainly moved inside the project, also moved outside the project window, and that's probably due to variation in flow. Okay, Dina, let's go to the next one. However, the site here, this was not as clear cut in the first sample range. This is the first time we've done post-project sampling as it was at Oak Meadows. So FIBI is on the right there for fish. And you can see there, universally across the watershed, the fish went up at all locations, including the downstream. That's not so unusual. Often when a dam is removed, more fish will move into the area to push upstream. And certainly we see the fish scores increased throughout the area as previewed. However, on the left of your screen, we have macroinvertebrates. And you can see there that, in fact, macroinvertebrates declined, except at the most upstream site, but they declined throughout the location. Talk to the Forest Preserve about why this may be. We haven't had that discussion yet, but it's likely something to do with the very fine silt that was at the site. If you remember in previous presentations, it was very difficult to deal with the dam removal at this location because of the amount of fine silts that had built up behind that dam, and it's more than probable some of those got released and affected the downstream location. I should also add that habitat restoration through that area was much more difficult than anticipated, simply because of the the ability of the substrate to support any kind of load. So riffles, etc., could not be constructed through there. So we're not previewing as big a bump as we would hope for at somewhere, say, observed at Oak Meadows or in the other locations at this restoration. But nonetheless, we'll keep monitoring this. We're going to be monitoring for a further 4 years, and I fully expect those IBIs for the macroinvertebrates to bounce up in future years as those fines move, if that's indeed the explanation. But this certainly is a good opportunity to try to observe and perhaps learn more about how macroinvertebrates, et cetera, respond to these restoration projects. Also should note, of course, a lot of this was brand new channel. So that could also have something to do with it, that it takes a longer time for a completely new fabricated channel to show a response than it does a channel that is perhaps drained, worked on, and then reflooded. So that may also be what we're seeing. Okay, Dina, next one. Okay, so Faywell Dam, this is on the west branch of the DuPage River, just a little bit north of Naperville. It is a structure, of course, owned by DuPage County Division of Stormwater, who are working with us on this project. What you're looking at on the left of your screen is the upstream face of this project. So the water is flowing into those 3 box culvert. It then drops down a lip onto a steep grade, and then it exits through the 3 culverts that you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, which is us looking upstream, and you can see part of the drop there. So the issue here is, of course, that fish cannot, we have 12 species of fish that cannot get through here. There's been an enormous amount of habitat restoration, not just the Spring Brook project that we just looked at, but the Tronics project, etc., that have been run in the upper part of this watershed, and we don't really see a big bump in fish species up there, and that's because largely the structure means they can't swim upstream. So the plan here is to put a fish ramp into the culvert on what would be the most, if you look on the left-hand side, at the upstream side, here it would be coming out of the culvert most to your left. Sorry, well, on that particular, Dino, it would be on the other side. Yeah, so yeah, that one. And then, correct. This would be it's a system of baffles. We're calling it a ladder. It's not really a ladder. It is this is working for over a year with a group out in Connecticut to design and get this in place. They have a fully designed item now, and we're working on a memorandum of understanding with Division of Stormwater about how this would be put in place and how it would be maintained. The hope is, of course, that we can get all 12 of these fish to swim through this structure. Anytime when you deal with a structure like this, the possibility of failure, of course, is present. Various ladder systems, etc., have not been very successful. The gentleman who designed this, came up with this, is highly knowledgeable. I've been very impressed with his understanding both of individual fish species and how to get them through barriers like this. And he is very confident. But of course, you know, full removal of a dam or something like that is much more, with much higher level of confidence that gets us to our end goal. However, this particular structure is a vital flood control structure. So, you know, removal or heavy modification is not on the card. So this is the plan that us and County Stormwater have settled on, and we're hoping to get it in place this year. So Dina, next slide. This is a view here of the what that system would look like. This is at another project, but ours would be a slightly different dimensions to this. It would be twice as tall, but essentially the same kind of, you can see in there, those internal fins, that's what creates these eddies that these species of fish have found that they can penetrate through pretty high flows in this system. Okay, next slide. All right, so our master plan for Salt Creek at Fullersburg Woods. This, of course, is a project that staff have been very heavily, worked on extensively over the last couple of years. This is the Growy Mill Dam that we can see here with the buildup of sediment, and you can see algae and duckweed, etc. Extensive areas behind that big sediment buildup to the northern part of the channel. This is scheduled to go into permitting and construction this year or early next year, as we saw in our budget, and it would be permitted under a nationwide permit. Dina, next slide. Pre-project monitoring that we've done at the site show, which we do, once again, this is more detailed, more intensive than our bioassessment. This allows us to try to get a better view of how organisms respond. So you can see here, we've got the sites from our pre-project monitoring in 2019, 2020, and 2021. And you can see here, this is for QHEI habitat. And you can see here, once again, we see this extensive drop-off as we move upstream of the dam. And this maps out perfectly onto our fish and macroinvertebrates. Dina, next slide. So you can see, especially with the fish on the right-hand side of the screen, obviously macroinvertebrates, many of their adult forms can fly, so they can populate areas if the habitat is present. Fish cannot do that. So we basically lose, I think if remember, it was like 16 species of fish as we move up through this dam. So those are eliminated from the rest of the watershed. With macroinvertebrates, it's a little more complex. You see a little bit more recovery as we move away from the dam pull. But this trough, and when we look at it, this sort of nadir area is still pretty extensive. The idea here is that we're predicting that once the dam is removed and the habitat restored in that area, that we would see those scores respond back to that. Certainly for macroinvertebrates, based on the Oak Meadows experience, we would expect them to go to around that 40 line, again, which is the compliance. So that's at the upper end of that gray bar. With fish, we would expect them to mirror the downstream conditions, which is in the mid or around 30 here, as you can see on the right-hand graph. Okay, Dina, next slide. So other projects that are under development then is our Southern East Branch enhancement. This is a project that could end up being one of our larger scale projects. We're working on this project with villages of Naperville, Bolingbrook, Parks Department of Bolingbrook and Naperville, and also some of our private partners, including Elmhurst, Chicago, and Stone. This is a concept plan here showing what the river would look like under one of the proposals. We're looking at various footprints for this project. We have done some work on gathering data all the way from Hobson Road through here, which is like a 9-mile reach of river. We do not have the funds to do all of that, though we are looking at some grant support opportunities that do seem promising. But we have scheduled, as we saw in the budget earlier, around $4 million for construction here, which would do at least part of this, perhaps this particular piece that we're looking at, which we're focusing on, which is in Will County. And this is the area just to the east of Weber Road, where the East Branch passes under it. Okay, Dina, next slide. Yeah, it's basically covering scheduled once again to go into construction in 23 to 25. Okay. Just to give a better view of what this project looks like on a watershed scale, this is our bioassessment data, once again, QHEI. So this is not just the target area for this project. Because of the scale of this project, it's good to step back and look at the entire watershed. So the area that we're looking at there is around River Mile 5. If you look up, you can see this QHEI distortion that we see here. This is essentially the area that we'll be hitting with this project, and we'll be trying to bring that up to the score that we can see in that downstream area. Next slide, Dina. So we look at the IBIs associated with that. Once again, because of the complexity of these, I put them on full scale as opposed to putting them on at half scale with two going on here. But once again, it's a little messy to see with the macroinvertebrates. But if we go to the fish, which is the next slide, you'll clearly see that kind of drop that we see. And every year that we've collected data here, it's reproduced the same drop off in fish throughout that area. It's more messy with the macroinvertebrates, but the fish show this very clearly. sort of hope this habitat restoration will smooth out that fish and hopefully draw in some fish from some of the other projects that are going on into the East Branch and hopefully up the river system. Next slide, Dina. So the other project then that we're working on, this is with Carroll Stream. It is the restoration of an area just downstream of their wastewater treatment facility.
Stephen, this is, oh, sorry, you have it labeled wrong, sorry.
Oh, I beg your pardon. I sure, well, yeah. It's getting a little late in the evening. You're completely correct. Sorry, this is the West Branch project, Klein Creek restoration. I apologize. I have got a wrong title on there. Sorry about that. I'm surprised it was the only one. I was working on this late last night. So, once again, this will be a reimbursement type project we're running with Carroll Stream, and we are gathering data for the IBIs and the QHEIs through a larger area in this, so we can track how the whole system responds to some of the less intensive project interventions that Carroll Stream is planning upstream of this project. I mean, if we go to the next slide, Dina, we will see this is pre-project data gathered in 2021 for QHEI again, and the fish IBI and the macroinvertebrate IBI. The reason we keep going back to these is that we just don't want to do a project and walk away. We want to do a project, check that it does improve the IBI scores, because those are what our permits rely on. Those are the drivers for the extra regulations that appear in our MPDS permits. And so it is important that all of these actions, reducing of salt, reducing of phosphorus, reducing improvement of habitat, does push these IBIs higher. And if projects that we do are not doing that, it's important that we learn why and refine them so we can do it better. Okay, next slide, Dina. So this project is not a DRSEW project. It was actually done by the, and I meant to put their logo on here, the Lower DuPage work group, and it is removal of a dam on the main stem of the DuPage River. Based on the bioassessments from that area, it limited 5 fish species. So this is in the Shorewood area. So once this dam comes out, these 5 fish should be able to penetrate north, and we're hopeful that we'll see at least some of them move up into the West Branch and the East Branch. As I was saying earlier with that East Branch project, you know, the better the habitat there is, perhaps the more of these main stem species that we can pull north. But obviously, with these dam barriers to fish movement, like this one here, we had this one on the main stem that eliminated 5 fish. Then as we move into the West Branch, we get to Faywell, that eliminated further, I think I had 10 species. So you can see the way they drop out. So, you know, it's an aggregate effect. So as we remove these, then we hope to see that as these fish can move up and down these systems, that we'll see those fish IBIs improve basin wide. It's not the expectation that all those fish go everywhere. Some of them are reliant on certain amounts of flow and channel width, etc. But nonetheless, this is, you know, until we remove these barriers, we won't be able to allow them to expand into their natural footprint within the basin. Okay, next one, Dina. Okay, so that's the end of the physical project rounds up. And once again, we'll be giving more detailed presentations on each one of those as we proceed. The last item that I'm going to speak to before handing over to Dina and Alex to talk about phosphorus and NIPS is our chloride management project. So as you know, we've been working on chlorides for 15 years. And in the last 2 years, we set out to try to identify if we were seeing an improvement in chloride concentrations. That proved to be a very difficult question to ask. And by improvement in chloride concentrations, what we actually mean is, based on the weather that we're encountering, are chlorides responding to any of our managerial inputs? This is a graph for 2 of our ambient monitoring sites on Salt Creek, one up at Bussey Woods and one at Wolf Road. These sites are managed by MWRD, and we use them during the winter to collect conductivity information, and which we then computate into chloride concentrations. So the 2 lines, Dean, if you could just run the cursor along those 2 upper lines, they are those best fit lines. Those represent loading and, no, those represent concentration at the two sites, sorry. So as you can see, winter concentrations are going down even when we control for weather conditions. Even when we don't control for weather conditions, the trend, obviously the trend line's a little messier, but we do observe winter chloride concentrations do appear to be falling on average. The two lines along the run parallel to the bottom of the graph represent loadings. And what we have found is that loadings have held fairly constant, but what is happening is flows are increasing, and that reflects, just appears to be more weather to account for. So this graphic would suggest that we are being more efficient with our chlorides in the face of increasing weather conditions. So go to the next slide, Dina. So putting each of these graphics for summer and winter into each one of our basins, we can see that that is pretty reflective of all of our basins where loading appears to be going up while concentrations are falling. The hypothesis is that it's simply more precipitation, be that ice, snow, or even during the summer, perhaps regular rainfall, but that is picking up more salts, which is adding to the loading, but we are seeing the concentrations trending downwards in all but winter in the west branch of the DuPage River. Perhaps more additional year data will show that it's just an anomalous trend line, but that's the only one that cuts against that trend, and I don't have a good explanation for why that is at the time. I'd be speculating. But qualified progress, and certainly in the summer, we are seeing typically we are seeing falling falling concentrations in our sort of very broad brush. This more detailed analysis suggests a more complex picture than that. But I think this around the area we're seeing chloride concentrations and loadings going up. So I think that this would suggest that we're making qualified progress there, but more work certainly needs to be done. All right, that is the end of my talking points, and I'm going to hand over to Dina to talk about the development of our nutrient implementation plan.
Thank you, Stephen. So what we have here on our first slide is obviously our nutrient implementation plan, or NIP permit language, that is in all of the DRSCW and Lower DuPage River Watershed Coalition permits. And so what our goals are to both identify what our sources and what our potential reductions for phosphorus by point sources, non-point sources, as well as other measures, with the goal of removing our dissolved oxygen impairments and our offensive condition impairments. So the DO is a numerical standard, but the offensive conditions is a narrative language that just kind of says that there should be no offensive conditions. And those are observed on our 303D and 303D list by things such as nuisance algae, nuisance plants, and in some cases, oil and grease or trash, which obviously aren't phosphorus related, but those are also other offensive conditions that are noted sometimes for our waterways. So we're supposed to look at this and develop a schedule of how we're going to implement some of these actions that we identify. We're obviously working together to do a one NIP for our entire watershed area that would include all four basins: Salt Creek, West Branch, East Branch, and Lower DuPage. And it is due to our agencies by December 31st, 2023. Now, this is pretty vague language, and over the years since this was implemented, our permits back in 2015, we've gotten a little bit of advice. One of the things that you should know, and I'm sure everyone's aware of that, the nutrient implementation plan name has sort of been transformed into the nutrient assessment and reduction plan, or NARP, for other permits. So this is not just a DRSCW requirement. Our language is sort of specific to us, but any majors that are discharging to impaired waters for nutrients or waters that are with eutrophication are also developing these documents under the name of NARP. And so the EPA has given us a little bit of information on what they'd like to see in these. And I've sort of divided it into two sections. The first is our watershed information and existing data. And this is the general stuff, the who we are, what have we been doing, kind of things like that. So it'll include a list of all of our members. It'll identify our risks, our impairments, or our risk of eutrophications, sort of using information that we have pulled for our IPS, as well as from an RBio assessment, as well as from the 303D list. It looks at all the types of dischargers that can be discharging phosphorus, majors, minors, or MS4 communities, as well as any industrial permitters, as well as other non-point sources, maybe such as agriculture down in the lower view page. We're also supposed to summarize all of our existing effluent and stream monitoring data. So we're going to be looking at all that type of stuff. So we'll be talking about our bioassessment reports and some of the data we have collected and what we've learned from that. And then there's sort of the action side of the NIP, and that's the data analysis and findings. And that is, we're supposed to describe what models we're using and what that's showing. We need to be making sure we're using actual data and sound scientific rationale. But the big goal for this NIP that I see is that we need to identify these target levels for phosphorus. And they're not specifically, so the target level is really being broken down into what would our effluent limit need to be in order to reduce phosphorus in our streams to improve the phosphorus situation. And we're looking at it from two different side points. It's looking at not just local water quality, so the actual Salt Creek or our tributaries, but the bigger issue with the eutrophication and the dead zone down in the Gulf of Mexico. So what phosphorus reductions do we need to make in order to preserve our local water quality, as well as reduce Illinois and our tributaries waters impact into that Gulf of Mexico issue? And so they've sort of given us two options. We could all take the recommendations by the Nutrient Science Advisory Council, which published the report in December of 2018, which is a very low limit of 0.1 milligrams per liter of TP. Or we could develop our own. And so you guys are all well aware, we're very much working on developing our own. We've talked a lot about that. We'll talk a little bit about it. And so then once we get this sort of watershed target number, we need to identify how we're going to reach that number, come up with the schedule, and it allows some provisions for water quality trading if we decide to go that route. So this is sort of what we're working on, and what we're working towards is putting together a document that includes all of these things. And how are we doing that? The same as way we do everything. Everything the DRSCW does and all of our decisions are very data driven. We don't just take someone's guess, we study it, we monitor it, and we come up with a solution using that data driven. We're also very focused on our biodiversity approach. We really have all of our programs and all of our projects and everything that we've been doing since we've been working together as a group has been focused on one main goal, and that's improving our biodiversity, improving those macroinvertebrate and fish scores in the rivers. That's our goal. We've never really been super focused on chasing certain parameters and certain numbers, sort of that pollutant of the day type philosophy. Our goal has always been to look at what we can do with our permits and with our actions to improve our macroinvertebrates and fish populations. We've sort of set out this approach that we want to continue into the NIP with the way we're working on our TMDLs. With our TMDLs, we have this adaptive management approach, which is sort of what kind of Stephen had talked about through the projects is, we study, we implement, we study some more, and we make changes and go from there. We have this big circular cycle on how things are going. And we probably will look at not just the phosphorus and nitrogen and the nutrient cycle. We want to look at maybe some of our other impairments. We know from some of our work, we have a lot of physical impairments with our habitat and structure like that. We also have impacts of chloride. And we don't want to lose that because we need to be working towards all these things together. So they're going to have to show up in our schedule and our plan of implementation. We don't just want to switch all of our focus onto nutrients. So we have many different studies that we're working on that are going to ones that are all going to be combined and put into what we are going to call our NIP. And I have a slide for each of these coming up, so I'm not going to go through those right now. But the first one is our IPS model. Our IPS model we originally ran it and we did an update that sort of expanded our database that was completed in like the end of 2018. And it really has three functions for our nutrient implementation plan. It is the source and it is how we are looking to develop our watershed specific target level of total phosphorus. Remember our option was 0.1 milligrams per liter from NSAC. And so we used our local data, our regional data, and we came up with a number of 0.28 milligrams per liter with our friends at MBI of total phosphorus as being an in-stream concentration. And this in-stream concentration is once again developed to call for the preservation and the increase of the macrovertebrates and fish in our watersheds. So we'll talk a lot about that number over this next 2 years. You'll probably get sick of hearing about it, but this number is very important for us. It is also, the IPS model is also what we've been using it for to date, was it identifies our priority stressors. So it's going to help us identify and rank where some of these stressors are in our watersheds, not just by each sub watershed, but by stream reach and by specific site. And it also helps us identify and design stream projects. So Stephen talked a little bit about some of the things that we're going to be doing this year based on the budget. But our real big thing is we want to finalize this report. We're going to get our staff trained. So all the staff, including not just the DRSCW staff, but the Lower DuPage, the Lower Des Plaines, and our friends up north at the Des Plaines River Watershed Work Group, as well as the North Branch Watershed Work Group, all know the capabilities of this tool and how it can be used. We're going to work with you guys to determine what this 0.28 milligrams per liter in-stream concentration means in terms of an effluent limit. So we have a lot of other work that we'll talk about that we're doing that. We've sort of presented that idea to you, but we need to know what that means. So we know we need to get 0.28 milligrams per liter in the stream, but what does that mean in terms of an actual effluent limit coming out of the plants? We're going to look at, do we want to continue our methods and select some more projects? And we're going to be coming back to you guys for a request in the next couple months to get some money or get a contract signed with MBI to really help us develop this technical language that needs to be in our NIP that explains how that 0.28 was developed. That's something that MBI did. That's where their expertise is, and we need to help them. We're ready to help from them to develop this section of our NIP. We also want to look a little bit more at our dissolved oxygen data and what that means for the state standard in Illinois. Illinois is a very complicated standard for DO. DO is one of the parameters that is not very well expressed through the IPS model, because the IPS model is looking only at those instantaneous water quality grab samples that we collected, and not that big continuous network of sites that we have that we've been maintaining with DuPage County Stormwater for years. So we have all this data. We're going to be coming to you guys once again very soon for to get a contract with MBI to really delve into what all this data that we've collected and what does it mean, how are we expressing the DO and how does that relate with phosphorus? Another project we have going on is our Qual 2K modeling. We're doing this with a contract with Tetra Tech. We've been working on it for a couple of years now. And what this is a water quality model. So we're IPS is sort of, this bigger, broader model. The Qual 2K model is really focused on dissolved oxygen, temperature, nutrients, CBOD, and algae in the streams. And we've developed 4 separate models for each of our sub watersheds, working with our partners down in the page. And this year, we really focused on the setup and the calibration of these models. So we've got the calibration done, the sensitivity analysis done. We got some draft model reports that will be going out to the projects committee that sort of summarize all the data we used and how these models are set up. And we started our preliminary scenario analysis. So what our goal is to do is then we have this 0.28 milligrams per liter number. We need to develop an effluent limit. So we also want to see what does that do as we reduce phosphorus from our current limits down to these other limits, the 0.28 or variations of that. What does that do to DO conditions in our water? So we're starting to run some of those scenarios with that. So that's our preliminary work where we are now. And then this year, we're really going to be refining that. We're going to take some of those different scenarios and look at other scenarios. We'll also as we're going through this work, we were very interested to see, what happens if we had no POTW inflow? Like if we had no plants, if somehow they magically went away, would we meet dissolve criteria in our streams? What would happen if our POTWs, even though it's very unrealistic, had no nutrients? What would we meet DO? Like how much is our DO being driven not just by our water chemistry, but by the physical nature of these streams based on how they're set up in the models? And we want to look at some of those things. So we're going to be running these additional scenarios. And then we're going to be creating, obviously, a bunch of different graphs on how to look at this, because it's very complicated. And we want to maybe look at what our percentage of time is below the standard instead of individual violations and things like that. And obviously a draft report. The April meeting of the DRSCW will probably be dedicated to an entire hour-long presentation on all the Qual 2 models and all the results and where we are with that. So stay tuned for more on this. Today, we're just kind of giving you a very high-level update on where we are with some of these projects. Our other project that we're working on is our non-point source feasibility analysis. This was due to the IEPA by December 31st of last year. We got it in, 7 days early? On December 24th, 2001. I have a link here on the website of where it is. It's on, this is the Lower DuPage's link, but it's also on the DRCW website. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Alex, since we worked a lot last year on this report and we haven't really presented the details on what we were doing and the findings outside the projects committee. We wanted to spend some time today giving you guys an update on that. So I'm going to turn it over to Alex. He's going to walk you through scope of that report as well as some of the findings.
Alex, just before you start, Dina, just noting that we had an extra decimal place in the NSAC recommendation. It's
Okay.
0.1, not 0.01.
Okay, sorry about
Yeah,
that.
I realize no, it's just a slip on our part, but just so nobody looks at that and goes, "Oh my goodness."
Okay, so this is our non-point source feasibility analysis that we completed. Special thanks to Baxter and Woodman for their assistance in the analysis as well as the report writing of this. So moving on to our objective. Next slide, please, Dina. So like Dina mentioned, this is part of our NIP requirement to explore the non-point source phosphorus reductions in our watershed. We came upon this with a USGS study completed in 2016 that indicated organic detritus is one of the main contributors of phosphorus in urban watersheds. So we wanted to evaluate the leaf litter. The objective of this study then was to evaluate the impact of current street sweeping and leaf management practices on those non-point source loadings of phosphorus, and then to develop recommendations on how we can make those current practices more effective. So this will be looking at the fall leaf collection as well as street sweeping. And in that study, it's indicated that up to 60% of annual phosphorus and runoff comes from leaf litter. Next slide, please. So the survey area that we looked at included the 4 watershed basins, the east branch and west branch of the DuPage, as well as the lower main stem of the DuPage, and then the Salt Creek Basin. This area represents about 530 square miles and encompasses about 104 communities, townships, and agencies that are responsible for approximately 8.8 square miles of right-of-way. Next slide. So for this analysis, we started with a literature review to see what data and information was already out there. And then from that, we developed a questionnaire that we sent out to all of those municipalities and agencies to collect further data. We completed a GIS analysis with a canopy layer, and then we used the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency street sweeping tool for our actual phosphorus calculations. Next slide, please. So our questionnaire was based on a Wisconsin MS4 leaf management survey. It was provided to us by William Selvig of the USGS. And it was sent out to 25 communities, 16 townships, and 4 agencies, so 95 in total. And we had a response from 55 of the people we sent, 55 agencies that we sent it out to. Of those responding communities, they represent 77% of the total watershed area. And our questionnaire contained 3 main sections. The first one was on street sweeping, asking questions about how much roadway they maintained, if it was curb or gutter, who conducts street sweeping, when, how frequently and when during the year sweeping is maintained, the type of equipment used, and then any alterations to those schedules based on leaf litter in the fall. And then we had our leaf litter section asking about whether or not there is a program, who conducts it, how it's carried out, collection frequency, equipment used, and then any alterations for weather, and then some questions on outreach and education for residents. And then our last section is on catch basin clean out, just asking how many basins are maintained, who cleans them, and how often. Next slide, please. The next part was our GIS analysis. Several studies have noted a strong correlation between canopy overhanging roads and then the concentration of phosphorus in street sweepings. So we wanted to see what kind of overhanging canopy concentrations we had within our watershed. Municipal boundaries, township boundaries, and right-of-way data was collected from individual counties. And then the canopy cover layer that we got was developed by the Spatial Analysis Laboratory from the University of Vermont. hand in hand with the Morton Arboretum. And so we use those layers as well as a surrounding land use layer from the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. And we came up with what we call effective canopy cover. And you can see an example of what the GIS output and a table of the data, both for Naperville's effective canopy cover. So we broke up their total roadway by surrounding land use type. And you overlaid that with the area of tree canopy within the roadway, and that gave us our percent tree canopy cover or effective canopy cover. Next slide, please. And then the last tool we used was our MPCA street sweeping tool. Now, this was developed by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency as a tool to generate phosphorus credits for their street sweeping agencies. There's 3 different inputs for this tool that you can use. There's dry mass data, wet mass data, and curb miles swept data. For our analysis, we used the third option, curb miles swept, due to the limited data that we had for dry and wet mass. And the first time we ran this, we received results that were incredibly low for our phosphorus removal, and like shockingly low. And so we went back to talk to Tetra Tech, who originally had developed this tool. And they told us that that low value was due in part to them wanting to encourage agencies using this to use wet and dry mass data, because it accounts for a lot more of the variability when you use those that don't come up in curb miles. So it's kind of their way to coerce people into using those other data options. Since we didn't have that available to us, they let us use the original data that they used to create this tool. And with that data and with our high resolution canopy cover data, we were able to calculate a new phosphorus removal rate based on curb miles that was much more realistic. So when we compared the new outputs we were getting to some of the outputs reported in other people's publications, we felt that our new rate was much more accurate and realistic to our specific watershed. Next slide, please. So some of the results from our questionnaire that we sent out, we had 55 responses. All 48 of the communities that we sent it out to, in addition to 2 townships, have a collection program. Of those agencies that responded, 88% of them mentioned that they do not alter their leaf collection for rainfall. 6% alter their collection to collect before rainfall, and 6% collect after. I want to note that only 30% of our agencies are sweeping their streets after leaf collection, but 90% do distribute educational material on composting and mulching. And then the sort of collection methods are outlined in this map on the right here. The solid green municipalities have residents bag or bin their leaves and then follow up their collection with street sweeping. Sort of like the best method that we have. The hatched green areas have residents bag or bin their leaves and then do not follow leaf collection with street sweeping. The solid purple have residents place their leaves directly on the ground or street, and they do follow up with street sweeping. Our hatched purple areas place leaves directly on the ground or street without street sweeping. And then the blue areas have residents place leaves on the parkway, and they do follow with street sweeping. Next slide, please. Some other results of the questionnaire for our street sweeping programs. There's only 4 agencies that don't have a street sweeping program, and they're all townships. But for those that do, we're looking at a representation of just under 9,000 centerline miles, 5,800 of which are curb miles. Additionally, 60% of our agencies do increase their sweeping in the fall, which we'll go into a little more with these distributions here. For the graph on the left, it's showing how many agencies are sweeping different types of roadway throughout the year. So it's fairly consistent throughout most of the year. Most of the agencies are sweeping to some degree all year long, with the exception of the winter months where there's a major drop off. And residential and arterial streets are swept a little more frequently than commercial, industrial, and central business. Our chart on the right shows the spread in the frequency of street sweeping throughout the year. During those initial winter months, January and February, virtually no one is conducting any street sweeping, save for a few agencies. And then we see an increase in the spring, with most agencies sweeping 1 to 2 times in April and May. And then there's another drop off during the summer, where pretty much everyone is sweeping 1 time during the summer months of June and July. And then we see our increase as we move into the fall, and we have our increased leaf litter, that people are sweeping more frequently, as many as 4 times in a month. However, throughout the year, there's still several agencies that are maintaining a pretty steady 1 or 2 a month sweeping without increasing. Next slide, please. So looking at our canopy cover, our data set show that there's pretty wide variability in conditions across all of our agencies. But if we look at it watershed wide, our main land use is comprised of residential area, being 66%. And a lot of the rest of them are fairly similar. But we have open space making up 6%, commercial making up 8%, our other larger ones, with agricultural, industrial, and institutional being fairly low represented. Within those land use types, we broke out what the effective canopy cover percentage is. So residential areas, in addition to being the largest land use, also has the highest tree cover density. So if we were to make a really general assumption on our watershed, we'd say if we increased all of our sweeping in residential areas, it would potentially have the largest impact. But like I mentioned, with the variability, it really needs to be considered on a more agency by agency basis, because we had some agencies with effective canopy cover in the residential area as high as 60% and some as low as 1%. So making the same recommendations for every single agency may not be the most effective use of some of this data. So then the results of our actual phosphorus removal based on the MPCA tool. On our new calculated rate, we calculated 25th and 50th percentile. And this represents the 55 agencies that responded, making up 77% of the watershed area. And we have a current removal rate of 6,870 pounds, up to 12,000 with that 50th percentage rate. That gives us an average phosphorus removal of 127 to 140 pounds per agency per year, up to 222 to 245 pounds for that 50th percentile rate. And then our box and whisker plot on the right just shows the spread of removal rates for every agency, because while our average is 127 to 140, it really does vary, from slightly above 0 to 300 pounds of phosphorus removed per year, with a few agencies much higher due to either very high roadway mileage that they maintain or exceptionally high sweeping frequency. Next slide, please. So based on this, we came up with a few recommendations on how to optimize street sweeping and leaf collection methods. A couple of notes on these. We want to make everyone aware that there has not been an attempt at this time to attach reduction totals to these recommendations. So we can't say for certain how much more phosphorus will be removed from implementing one or many of these different recommendations. We also, when coming up with these, wanted to aim at optimizing total phosphorus reduction within the resources that are already present. So rather than recommending that everyone just buy an enormous fleet of street sweepers and sweep constantly without stopping, we wanted to sort of recommend ways to reallocate current resources without having to make enormous costly changes. We also want to note that when utilizing these recommendations, they need to be considered within the context of individual agencies, both for their specific canopy cover and roadway data, as well as maintaining their own priorities. Additionally, we omitted structural BMPs from our recommendations due to the fact that they have the potential to go from sink to sources in total phosphorus, as well as the limited space in our urban watershed to construct such things and the prohibitive costs associated with them. So then the last note then is the efficiency of these recommendations needs to be compared against the scale and cost of phosphorus capture at treatment plants. Before we just go ahead and change all these, it may be more worthwhile to spend that time and money with our effluent after all. And that evaluation is going to be included in the MIP. But then so our recommendations, first off, is just increasing street sweeping after leaf collection. There's a number of agencies that don't sweep after collection. And doing so can pick up a lot of that finer material that gets left behind, and also just ensure that there's no organic matter left to leach in the roadways. We can also increase the street sweeping frequency in those months for anything that gets blown into the streets or left behind, making sure we are picking up all that particulate matter. There's also another smaller increase in the spring in phosphorus, mostly due to pollen and seeds and other still organic material, but not associated with leaf litter fall. But so reallocating some increased street sweeping in the spring can also reduce phosphorus levels at that time. And for these increases in sweeping and leaf collection, we imagine those costs could be offset by decreasing street sweeping in less impactful times of the year, when we may not be collecting as much, so we can collect more during these high impact times. But leaf litter collection can be prioritized by that effective canopy cover layer that was generated, so that if there is limited time to be out collecting, we can make sure to get the most highest density areas. We can utilize weather forecasting in our leaf collection. Since the rainfall does cause most of that leaching of phosphorus through the storm sewers and into the rivers, making sure we collect leaves before it rains, if possible, can help remove all of that organic matter before it has a chance to leach. We also have the possibility to conduct public outreach campaigns. Wastewater or stormwater authorities and DRCW and LDRWC can work with agencies and municipalities to send out information to residents about phosphorus and leaf litter and best management as well. And then we can explore local ordinances to prohibit blowing of landscape waste into roadways for residents and for landscaping companies to ensure that we're not adding any more organic material to our roadways. Next slide, please. So then the last thing is our opportunities for further study. If after we look at the comparative cost of treatment plant phosphorus removal and we decide that this is the route to go, we have some ways that we could potentially increase the accuracy of our data. First and foremost, just increasing the response rate to our questionnaires, get that 55 number up to closer to 100%. We can collect additional timeline data of leaf litter collection and street sweeping efforts, such things as more details on the routes and the scheduling, how long it takes, the personnel available, so we can make sure our recommendations aren't spreading agencies too thin. We can also collect data on dry and wet mass from street sweepings to better use the more advanced functions on that MPCA tool and get even more accurate phosphorus reduction estimates. We can conduct a tree species inventory, since it's been shown that different species of trees leach different phosphorus amounts and rates. Getting a better idea on the specific species we have within our watershed and along our roadways can help improve our estimates as well. And then we can increase our data on phosphorus speciation, looking at how phosphorus interacts with DO in the rivers and at the percentage of dissolved phosphorus to total phosphorus in our leachate and in our runoff. Yeah.
Thank you, Alex. That was a good summary of all of the report and anything you can find. I believe Stephen posted the link to the report into the chat, so you guys should be able to have that if you have not downloaded that already. I just wanted to kind of go what we're planning on doing this. We obviously listed a lot of further study or further activities that could be done, but we need to spend some time in the next year sort of evaluating those. One of the things that we want to try to do is that there are a couple larger communities that didn't submit in 2021. We want to see if we can track down that information and do some minor upgrades to the tool and run that through the MPC calcs. And then, as Alex said, we're going to spend a lot of time taking that 6,000 to 12,000 pounds of phosphorus and comparing it to what that total phosphorus coming out of the treatment plants is and where the most cost-effective ways to be spending our money will be. And that'll be all included in our final draft of our nutrient implementation plan. The last kind of project I sort of want to go over that we've been working on for several years, but that's been on hold for the past years, is a nutrient trading program. If you remember, we were looking at two different paths of that, looking at point source to point source trading, as well as point source to non-point source or stream restoration crediting. We finished our evaluation of that point source to point source in 2018, 2019. And we had been working on the stream restoration side. But then we've decided in the last year that we're going to put that on hold for right now. Right now, we've decided that we need to, before we determine how we're going to trade, we need to determine if trading is feasible or if we still want to go down that path. And in order to do that, we need to set an effluent limit, a long-term effluent limit for total phosphorus removal, calculate costs, and find out if we have additional buyers or sellers for that, and then move forward. So we've sort of put that project on hold. You've noticed that there was no money in the budget for it, but that's where we are with that. I mean, it will be included obviously in our NIP, but as of right now, we're not pursuing trading at this time. The last project, that last scope of work that we do that in association with our NIP is our expanded DO and chlorophyll A monitoring. You know that we do have our normal bioassessments, but we needed to look at getting some additional data at some sites. And so what we've been doing over the past 3 years now, we've managed to complete it in most of our watersheds, is adding chlorophyll A. We did not have chlorophyll A as a bioassessment parameter. We did not have a database and a background of chlorophyll A data. We do know that's very important when looking at how phosphorus is expressing itself with DO and other factors in our watersheds. So we've added that as a nutrient demand parameter to help build up that base. And then once again, if we look at rerunning the IPS, we'll be able to look at developing a threshold for chlorophyll A in our watersheds. We're also collecting some short-term extensive monitoring at some of our sites below each wastewater treatment plant. And this is to run an analysis called SNAP, which is the Stream Nutrient Assessment Procedures, on those sites to really look at is the DO issues that may be in that stream watershed being caused by phosphorus. Do we have this eutrophication or this risk for eutrophication at each of these sites? So we've been taking these short-term deployments of the DO sounds, collecting a lot of intensive water quality and chemistry at sites in our headwaters, as well as below east wastewater treatment plants. And this will all be incorporated in our NIP. And we're going to be really focusing on doing this evaluation this year in-house and working with our partners over at MBI to make that analysis. The last thing I want to highlight is our NIP schedule. Obviously, the final product is due to the IEPA by December 31st, 2023, but there's going to be a lot of review and a lot of discussions that need to happen before that. So one of the things that we want to start with early this year, into the summer and spring, is getting down to the IEPA to really discuss that 0.28 milligrams per liter number and what that means in terms of effluent limits in our permits. So you'll be hearing from Stephen and I again with each of our permit holders to, sort of narrow that down as we finish this Qual 2K modeling. And then we want to get down and start preliminary discussions with the IEPA to sort of get their input on that. And so we know we're on a path that they're open to approving and moving forward with our permits. The first section of the NIP I would like to get completed by the end of this year, and that's the draft watershed information section and existing data. This is sort of the who's, the what, it's kind of the basic stuff that we already have, but getting that formatted into a draft and getting that out to our members for review so that we can kind of put that section to bed and really focus on that data analysis section for our last final year. We assume that we will have a draft of the NIP for all of our members to review by July 31st, 2023. That will give us 6 months to finalize the document, make any changes, get it out for other different types of review, possibly by some of our partners with our EAGs and such things like that. So when we do submit it to the IEPA on December 31st, there are no surprises for anybody. And Stephen, that is the last slide that I have.
Okay.
So if we have any questions.
Yeah, and I realize, members, there's this is a roundup of kind of everything, and there's a lot of things going on, obviously, and a lot of other pieces that come out of all this. So any point you want to talk about, any piece of it, just give us a call, and more than willing to talk through it. For our special conditions members, obviously during this year, we're going to have some meetings to talk about the various components of this NIP and checking, feeling our way forward to our recommendations to IEPA that Stina was saying we'd hope to get them on board this year with our long-term plan for how to deal with phosphorus and all those components. We'd like to get that done this year so people have a clear planning horizon for the future. So Dave, I think that's everything we had.
Okay, Dina and Alex, thank you for talking. Alex is with us as an environmental scientist for 0.4 of his time at TCF. So great to have Alex with us. I don't see any other comments coming through. We appreciate your time today. Thank you for allowing us to reach quorum and handling all these business items. We're going to have our next meeting on April 27th. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Made by Tom Menard and seconded by Amy Underwood. So we are adjourned at 10:55. Thank you, everyone, and be safe and have a good rest of the winter.